Good.
Question number 5, Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Minister of Women Affairs: does she stand by her statement that closing the gender gap is one of my top priorities?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Jacinda Ardern.
Supplementary. If closing the gender pay gap is a top priority, why was dumping the plan of action for pay equity audits one of the very first things her government did when they came into office?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Paula Bennett.
You'll be pleased to know that it's my top priority as Minister for Women, and I've been in the job for 2.5 months and already made a lot of progress there. So now we have 45% of senior leaders in the public service, and I reckon that's going to make a big difference seeing women in those roles. 12 of the 29 CEs are actually women as well. We have now published the information for the public service, which is making a big...
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. I was quite specific. I was interested in the rationale that her government had for dumping the action plan around pay equity audits.
Yes. And as Minister, she's certainly responsible for actions that have been taken by the government throughout its term, so I invite the member to ask the question again.
Supplementary. If closing the gender pay gap is a top priority, why was dumping the plan of action for pay equity audits one of the first things her government did when they came into office?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, because we had other priorities right then working into the GFC. What I will say is right now we're working on legislation around the Joint Working Group principles on pay equity. We are working through in good faith negotiations on the Terra Nova and the work there with aged carers. We've also got 2 other claims that are in that we are, as I say, working through the principles as the legislation is happening as well, and we are committed to making a difference in that area.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Jacinda Ardern.
Supplementary. If closing the gender pay gap is a priority, has she reprimanded the Minister of State Services for the fact that gender pay gap there is 22% and has gotten worse, not better, in the 3 years since she has been Minister?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula
Mr
Bennett.
Speaker, the public service gender pay gap is actually 13.5%. So that's where it is. This is the lowest it has been since the measurement began in the year 2000, and so that's what we're focused on. And the gender pay gap is actually decreasing slowly overall. As I've also said, we've got an absolute commitment. We've now got 45% of women in senior leadership roles within the public service. It's the first time we've actually published by department the gender pay gap within it, and we are committed to reducing it.
Supplementary question, Jacinda Ardern.
If closing the gender pay gap is a top priority, then what specifically has her government done in 9 years as an employer and contractor to actually lift the wages of home care workers and support workers?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable.
Well, as I've said numerous times, we've actually increased the minimum wage every year since we have been in government, and that's made a difference. And we are currently in good faith negotiations on Terra Nova, which will affect over 50,000 predominantly women in that area.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Dr Parmjeet Parmar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What is being done in the public sector to promote women to leadership positions and close the gender pay gap?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, there are some fantastic things that are actually happening within the public sector, and I think they can set an example, do better and publish those results. For example, as I've already stated, we have 45% of all leadership roles in the public sector are now held by women, and we are well on track to get that to 50%. We now publish the gender pay gap by department so that we can see progress being made in doing that transparently. The police, for example, have a target of 50% of new recruits being women, and they also run unconscious bias training, which is making a difference. Defence have also noticed that they may have been getting more women in at the lower end, but they weren't actually progressing up into senior roles, and so they have changed their processes and are taking proactive action there to make sure that they can get them in.
Supplementary question, Jacinda Ardern.
Closing the gender pay gap really is a top priority. Can the public sector truly play a leadership role when MB, who is meant to model this to the private sector, has a gender pay gap of 20%, higher than the national average?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
But that's exactly why we published it. That's exactly why we're going to make a difference. And that is why we are going to close that gap. And my point is, and the point that we've been making, no one's been going out there and saying it's perfect. No one is going out there and saying that this is where it's at. What we are saying is that there will be significant improvements and we will stand up and be counted for it.
Question. Order. Question number. Order. The members wish to carry on their discussion. They're welcome to do it outside the House. Question number 6, Stuart Smith.